Hope you're enjoying the conference so far. It's great to see so many people in person again. This event is the data panel, and with me today are two distinguished guests. We've got Tom Dalglish here and Kevin McQuinn. Tom is a highly accomplished CTO and CDO. His previous roles have included Group Data and Chief Technology Officer at UBS, Chief Architecture at Merrill Lynch, and Managing Director at Principal Bear Stearns. He's currently the Head of Data Governance and Enablement at Now TV, which is part of Sky, which is based just down the road. And then Kevin Quinlan is the Lead Data Scientist at ESB, and that is the largest utility company within the Republic of Ireland. So Kevin manages and implements projects across a range of business units, and he uses various technologies, leveraging AI and machine learning techniques to generate value for ESB. This has included projects for HR, for customer retention, and he's also been working with drones and image recognition. So welcome, Kevin and Tom.
Thank you. Thank you.
I used to be the data officer at Nuveen Real Estate, and which is the fourth largest real estate investment manager in the world. And I recently started my own company called CRELYTICA, and it's a data analytics and robotic process automation consultancy specializing in commercial real estate. So we have 3 discussion points today, which are: what are the best approaches to running a successful data project? And then second is, what are the biggest challenges that the panel are facing, and what software are they using to overcome those challenges? And then finally, there's a discussion around the alignment of the data strategy and then the business strategy. So I just wanted to know if anyone's got any points that they'd like us to incorporate within that. Has anyone got any questions that they'd like us to concentrate within those 3 elements? Okay, excellent. We can have questions obviously at the end of the piece. So we'll kick off with the best approach of running a successful data project. So Kevin, thinking about your internal clients' pain points, how do you assess those, and also how do you then prioritize them?
Yeah, I think what we do a lot is we're trying to work hand in hand with the business a lot, and it used to be a thing where we used to go in and just kind of unconsciously we'd tell them what we think their problem is, and they might tell us what they think the solution is, and you know we're coming at it from the opposite sides in that sense. So it's a major case of going in and working hand in hand. Before the pandemic, we would have done things like shadowing and moving our desk over to wherever the business is. So if it was energy trading, we'd go over and sit with the traders for a couple of days, see how they actually run their processes, what they need for the particular project, like what screens that they're looking at for different items. Now obviously can't do that, can't just pop around for tea anymore really. But we use plenty of kind of ways now, and I usually feel the best is kind of almost like a whiteboarding session where you go in, you have a lot of people in the room, you figure out exactly what they want to do you give them post-it notes, everyone writes down any problems they want, you might divide into different sections, and making sure there's a strong facilitator there as well that doesn't allow, the senior manager comes in and tells exactly what he thinks the problem is, and you don't have the actual users of the end system telling you. And that whole documentation then online, if you do something with, say, Mural, it's kind of a big thing we'd like to use for that kind of post-it note sessions. And then it's just a case of putting them into a backlog and prioritizing them there. And a big thing, like we're very much going down the Agile route, and we had been waterfall before, but it's all Agile now, and it's getting out of POC as quick as possible. So getting out something very quickly that the users can see and then tail behind, I guess the idea is firing. But then the big issue with getting a POC out quickly is that becomes a template very quickly when you don't know what the actual problem is. So it's very critical that you do a POC, you get kind of buy-in from the business quickly, but then you just chuck that POC straight away and go, now let's really find out what the project is, because otherwise you started from somewhere too high up without knowing exactly what the issue is.
Yeah, I think you see that a lot at the moment, because there are a lot of theory if you're running a small business to get the minimum viable product out there, start developing that, getting buy-in, seeing on small resource, seeing customers react to your product and going from there. Tom, have you got anything?
I'd largely echo that. I think with our teams, we try and get something working straight away. Very often, and we didn't have the great relationship with the business that you do, very often the business don't know what they need to do, or don't know what they should be doing. So very often from the data side, we say, well, we've got these bags of data, and you could do these kinds of things with it. Well, what would you like to do next? So I like your approach, Kevin, where you sit with them, but very often you sit for a long time and nobody can actually say what we really need. So that's one thing, and we use Miro and Teams and all of that. The other side of it is we very often get stuck behind the inertia of technopolitics. If I have a dependency on your team, I may wait a long time, and then if your priorities change, managing the cross-team dependencies becomes a huge nightmare. And if you're a small team, my team is fairly small, I got about 16 people. We don't have a big project office. We've got a bunch of data engineers, and I would say I prefer builders over architects. We build it, and then we make it better. And so the challenge for us is, as you said, Kevin, if you build it and you don't throw it away, you're stuck with that for a long time. My counter to that is, if you've got the right talent, building it in the first place, that will get you through to the next budget cycle, and you can build something better.
Yeah, excellent, Tom. So you're touching as well on there around, I suppose, the inevitable roadblocks that come during the project. So we've started with, the first piece, like planning, etc. Then what happens is when you need to say, it wouldn't be you be the person, I suppose, solving this, but when there's inevitable roadblocks that come from the people working for you on trying to implement pieces and the individuals that I suppose maybe part of the roadblock are in a different team. So how do you approach that?
Well, they send in a guy from New Jersey, and we talk about them roadblocks that they put in there. That's a huge challenge for us. I mean, in any large company, your priorities aren't the same as my priorities. So we start with a plan B. Before I even meet with Yvonne, I already have half-baked solution. It may not be production ready, it may not be, NP complete, but it works. Like when you do scaffolding, right? There's paint on the floor and there's a scaffold in the way, but I can get the data from me to you. And if the team deliver over the next 3 months, happy day. It's fraught with peril to challenge that, right? If they don't work for you, and if you're sort of an American like me and say, well, look, you didn't do what you said, that's no longer received well as it was 20 years ago when you could just be more frank and open. So for us, we start with a plan B that works, MVP, I think you called it.
Yeah.
And when push comes to shove, if the other teams fail to deliver and I can't impress upon them the importance of delivery, then we stick with the plan B and we assume that technical debt.
That's fantastic. And so once a project has been completed, how do you then onboard the business so that they're actually consuming the data analytics or consuming the product, and so that the actions, they actually then make actions on the insights that are generated? So how about do you approach that, Kevin?
Well, I think if you're waiting till the end of the project for a lot of this, it's already too late. So it's about getting the builders now as well. The business involved right at the start, and always incorporating as part of the team. And it's that agile, quick release. So doing one version, say if it's a dashboard, let's say, doing one version, presenting it to the business, doing your sprint, coming back 2 weeks later and presenting the new one, and that kind of continuous ones. That's almost the business already so aware of the dashboard by the time it's ready that it's almost second nature. And a big part of our data visualization strategy as well is having templates that it's easy to feed into, that if someone's using one dashboard, they're not have to relearn about, where the filter's gone, how do I drill down to this level of data. It's standardized across different dashboards, different products that they'll use. And it's all about just keeping it as simple as possible for them. And also it's easy for junior members of staff when you have a good template there that they don't have to worry about what type of font they should put on the label for a pie chart. They can use it and then you stick it into the template, but focus on the real business problem, getting the key information out.
Yeah.
And then I think, sorry, it's a big for AI or whatever and models is, and that people don't do, is reassessing after the fact and going back and seeing, 6 months later, our assumptions that we built this model and we productionized is still correct. And has there been any biases which have come in the interim? So like, again, if we did energy trading, that was perfect up to 18 months ago. Then the complete energy market shifted and we had to throw out all the models. We couldn't just leave and just assume that they're going to be right again.
That was going to be my question. How a lot of what we build depends on what your goal is. Are we building, something that's going to last 10 years or 10 months? How often do you find you need to recycle the models, and do you get enough attention and funding from the business to say, look, that model was good for last year's market. We need a new one here, and I need another data scientist to help us tweak it because the guy that wrote the first one just quit. How did you find those life cycles of
Yeah, I think before it used to be, again, I was just waiting on the business almost to come back. Now we're starting to get into, as we're getting more mature, this idea of checking it every so often, or we use a lot of Microsoft Azure, and they have these tools which you can check and make sure that the variance with the actuals and the prediction isn't separating too much, and you get an alert then to say something's happening, something has changed. It's not the accuracy has kind of shifted, whatever. So it's kind of, then you reacted to that. But you could also have the business coming to you and say something's coming in.
Wrong, yeah.
3 months down the line, something's happening. So we might need to shift it then.
I think to your point on how do you get the business engaged in what you've just built for them, I agree, Kevin, you start early if they're not engaged early on and you can't show them something quickly. But I find, in my experience, that communication loop 6 months later it decays. It becomes awkward sometimes to remind you, hey, we did these 3 models. Are you using? Do you still like them? So we do an awful lot of instrumentation on who sees what. We trust but verify. We know you're using the model because Kevin's in there 10 times a day and Yvonne comes in once every other month. So I think we found a lot of that. We can, I think, prove the engagement. If people are using your dashboards, if the model's being hit, then that's helpful.
Yeah, some of the benefits of going on to servers, because you can actually track the usage across the platform. So on the second piece, so looking at the biggest challenges the panel are facing and the software that you're using to conquer those challenges. So the first question is, what are your biggest challenges and what sort of technology are you using it, Kevin?
So I think the biggest thing at the moment really for us is plugging the kind of gaps of data that we have. So ESB is what I call vertically integrated utility. So it's involved in everything from the generation through the distribution, the maintenance, the supply, the trading. So we generate a load of our own data and we also get in a lot of third-party data. But then there's all these gaps that the regulator will come to us saying, like, you need to map with we'll say low voltage networks, so mapping where the wire goes from the pole into the house. Like, we have no visibility of that. And that challenge then is met with a lot of GDPR and ethical challenges. Like, we assumed we were going to be able to do this through rolling out smart meters across the country, and we were able to use that data to be able to map it. But then the data regulator came and told us we weren't allowed to use that data. And that was a big part of why we were doing the project in the first place. So now we have to overcome that and look at things like, so instead of using simple data for identifying where that low voltage network is, we're using computer vision to go down through Google Street Maps and be able to spot the poles and where the wire is going to the house and mapping it that way. So we had to create a complicated solution where you had a simple one there, but it's trying to plug the kind of gaps we have in the data, and a lot of it we're using is computer vision to do that, and identifying things like if vegetation. So the things we're working with drones is identifying where vegetation is overgrowing on lines or where it might need work, and that's using drones and AI to identify where that is, rather than sending out an inspector every 6 months to a location and them going up in the pole and having a look.
Yeah, nice. And what about yourself, Don?
Well, I think that's pretty awesome. I find that a lot of people misunderstand what GDPR in this case actually lets you do and not do. And very often they say, you can't do that. I say, of course I can. One of the things at now is there's a lot of piracy. So it's an allowable use for us to get your email address and your IP address and find out where you are and how many devices you're watching on. And very often data protection will, with a heavy hand, say, nope, can't do that. So we've got to bring in legal and so on to say, well, actually, this particular group, it's well contained, it's PII restricted data, we know that they could see it, we refresh it every 3 months, and this is a viable part of what they do in business. We find that that can slow you down. So when we talk about the general obstacles, one is a lot of this cloud technology is really brand new, yeah? And the developers coming out say, well, we're going to use all of this. We're going to use Apache, Stardust, everything we can get our hands on. And they don't really know that there's a lot of stuff that's been running for 20, 30 years that you can just use. So we find those two things, the over-exuberance of the development community to try the next new thing, and sometimes the more slowly moving legal compliance. I had to do 2 audits in the last 18 months, one internal, one from the parent company. And all of a sudden you're trying to get work out the door and hit your schedule, and I've got to talk to the auditor, and he's a tough guy, so we find that.
Excellent. So do you have any advice on any of the people here listening on how best approach a situation where you want to move away from a legacy system? So you're touching on there around the new technology that's coming out and new ways of doing things. How do you have that conversation when it's a cost piece?
You start with the plan B. So believe it or not, I decommissioned a legacy system that was only 5 years old. So it seems hard to believe that you could have something only 5 years old and it's already legacy. And it was primarily so because of clear text emails, lack of security, storage policies, no encryption. So we commissioned a new one, and it was 2 years late. It took a very, very long time. We had a big 6 consultancy firm running it, and they sort of ran in their own direction. So for me, the first thing we did when I took that bit of it over is we automated the testing. How do we know when we're done? And we broke it into 3 pieces. Just because I bring data over from the old system into the new system doesn't mean it's perfect, and it doesn't mean I've turned off the dependencies on the legacy platform. So we broke it into 2 or 3 pieces. One was get all the data over without offending the data protection gods. I mean, this was Now TV and Sky TV, and we have 2 cloud tenancies, and they're like, well, you can't do that. Well, yeah, see, because I work for Sky and you work for Sky, and it's the same network, and we can move the data from A to B. But if you get in front of the wrong person, that could be lengthy. So there's a lot of cudgeling, similar word, but different implement. And we were able to do that. And then once we had this mechanism to automate bringing the data over, we tried to automate the testing. It was much harder to turn off the legacy system because we didn't know that Charlie was plugged into it from a spreadsheet or a smart sheet on Google Drive that was hitting basically software that hadn't been updated in weeks. So as we began to ratchet that down, the mice come out of the woodwork. So
yeah, I think you touched on a lot of pieces here as well around understanding a firm's political way of doing things as well, and understanding the best people to speak to, the enablers in the business. You can speak to a couple of people within departments. They're in the same department, but you'll find after some sort of time within an organisation who those people are you can speak to get things done, and who those people who are maybe more of a blockade. So I can say it now, I'm not at the email.
I think, do we find that sometimes people become timid to make the decision? You could make the decision, but I don't know, I better sit on it for a week. We find that inertia thwarts what we're trying to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And we're trying to move, even legacy systems of just people using their own data and their own Excel spreadsheets and hiding it away. And it's a big thing we're trying to get rid of, and upping, we say, our Power BI usage. And a big thing we're trying to do is and the idea is just to generate jealousy throughout the business. So going into the business and showing off, we did this beautiful dashboard for this manager, and inviting other managers to go see it. It's like, wouldn't you like this lovely dashboard too? And just building that jealousy. And we have we've set up a data culture kind of committee that will organize talks, and we had like an analytics week there a couple of weeks ago, where we just did, every business unit had their own, showcase their own dashboards or projects from the year, and just kind of generate that.
Surely you have a chat bot that competes with the other one. It says, oh, this stuff is really good. You should have this. You don't have this, but these guys are really loving it. That's what I would do.
Yeah, nice. And just one last question on this piece. So how do you onboard new AI machine learning pieces with the inevitable black box issue? I know the piece you were speaking to earlier is fairly well understood. Yeah. But when it's not something like image recognition, and it's more of a decision-making piece, how are you finding that, especially working in the EU?
Yeah, it's tough, and there's the whole question of ethical AI, and just because we can do something, should we do it? Especially around black box, and the EU came out with their guidelines on AI and ethics earlier this year, and it will go the way of GDPR probably, and it'll probably be something like, we are very much okay if it's a black box and it's dealing with, might target an ad to a user, and how we've done that doesn't really matter how we've figured that out. But if it's something that's, we don't just cut the electricity off people, but it's saying now we wanted to build a black box that would say this person doesn't get electricity. And it's caused they're defaulting on payments, whatever. But if we can't explain it, if it's a black box, that obviously is terrible, because it could be something very small that's nothing to do with their ability to repay or something that comes into it. So it is that, and that's something we always have to look at, is the ethical idea of if it's going to affect someone, it can't be black box. It just can't be.
And Tom,
we found something similar there, and I was applying to refinance on a mortgage, and the answer was no. I did it on the web. The answer was no. So I did it with a person, and the answer was no. And I said, well, why? And then they said, well, we can't tell you. I said, you have to tell me, right? Because they knew this was not black box, but it highlighted the ambiguity, and it turned out I was too old, a little bit too old. And I said, well, if you just told me that instead of a 15-year mortgage, I get a 10-year mortgage, And to their credit, this particular vendor called me back, and we did the deal. And had that been black box, you would like to know. Yeah. So I don't know, are you doing explainable AI? Is that possible with your team? Is anybody here working on explainable AI, where there's a matrix inside the box and we don't know what it did, but we'd like to know? No? This is pretty tricky stuff. So
yeah. We try and do a small bit, but it is that kind of complex, and we're kind of saying, look, we just won't. But the issue then is, we try to do black box, and if we're doing it with someone if we're an engineering company, or if we're going to trading, and these guys are maths whiz as well, they want to know exactly what's causing, why it's saying the electricity price is going to go up tomorrow. And if we can't really explain to them, then they're not as likely to go for it, because it's just they know enough that they want to know that little bit more of why. So it is a tricky one.
And I was going to say, does anybody in their organization have a data ethicist? Or we've hired one. We have a data ethics team now, and they sort of look at what we're doing. I guess we'll see more of that. Yeah.
And finally, looking at the business strategy and the alignment with the data strategy, how closely aligned are they at Kevin?
Well, we're working on kind of different data strategy at the moment now, and we've already had kind of a big corporate strategy, but you can see it is coming more closely aligned. We had a big reorganization of the company a few years ago, and they split IT in two, and there's an operational side and a strategic side. And the data and the data analytics has gone to the strategic side under the CIO, because that's what it's for. And it's becoming closer because we work in utilities and green tech, and we really have to reduce our carbon output and get into renewables. So we don't have time for the finger in the air. So we'll say things like, no, data is an enabler, but that doesn't actually kind of get really, it's absolutely crucial, because we don't have time for the finger in the air or to be inefficient in our use of renewables or whatever. We just don't have time for it anymore. So data is becoming much more crucial, and it's a cyclical effect. So you said that the strategy for the company, then you need to go to the data strategy and see what can and can't be done. And so the data strategy gets made based on the company strategy, but then based on what we can and can't do from the data, that should go back into the company strategy and reassess as well, and just that cycle until you have a balance.
And Thomas, have you got any last remarks on that?
It's difficult. I mean, small company, piece of cake. What we found is there's always this pendulum swing of federated data. You keep your data over there, or put it all in one gigantic data lake. At least data lakes are drying up, which is a good thing. Very often, we find that our business strategy has outpaced our data strategy. A lot of the data that I get, so we do a lot of viewing, so I want to know, he watches a lot of sports, maybe he wants a sports pass, and somebody's doing drama, maybe we'll get them an entertainment pass. And we find that the upstream systems that feed us, they're not there for me, right? So what they do, if they're missing a field that I need to capture, like the wiring point from the pole to the house, they don't care, because they don't need it for their business. So a lot of the things that we find are the data that come across, take it or leave it, because we're here to make sure that you can view it. We don't care what you saw last week. I only care about what you're gonna watch tonight. So a lot of the ideal behind having one great data lake for all is hampered by the fact that the data that I get from Oliver, he uses it just nicely, thank you. He doesn't need it for the deep analytics and the AI learning that Kevin needs. So we find that puts us sometimes at odds of getting what we need. And then, of course, you will spring up and bolt on your own data, and that's where it starts to go awry, where you don't have that official single source of truth or the data lineage, and that can slow you down.
No, excellent. Thank you very much, Tom and Kevin. And I just want to open it up to anyone here. Does anyone have any questions on what they've heard from our participants here or myself?
In the back, please.
You mentioned about some people with their hidden spreadsheets, and you also mentioned about Power BI dashboards. Do you take their data out of their spreadsheets and put it in a SQL database in Azure, or how do you bring them over to the side of having their data appearing in those Power BI dashboards?
Yeah, so it depends. So if it's just somewhere like one spreadsheet, it could just be a case of, we'll see if they're downloading straight from a system, which a lot of people do, and just manipulate it there themselves. We'll just hook onto the system in front, but they don't really care. Like, so we'll do it as quick as possible for them, so they're using Power BI. So that could be a case of, we just hook it onto the Excel straight away, and then they don't care then what's happening in the background. Customer doesn't care if it's coming from an Excel spreadsheet, if it's coming straight from a system, if it's hopping 3 or 4 different places before it gets to that Power BI dashboard. As long as it's correct information and it's what they want, it's there. So we'll do it quickly as possible, just stick something on top of it, then work in the automation after that.
We call it EUC, end user computing. So I guess 2 examples. One, where the business actually, content comes out and they maintain a list of the promotions that are going to come out, Black Friday, Christmas. And nowadays, at least in Google, you can bolt that spreadsheet and automatically renders as a SQL table. Yeah, sometimes it's buggy. But another group uses, I would say, Smartsheets, a product like Smartsheets, but they didn't pay for the license that we needed to link it in with API calls so that when you update the spreadsheet, I get new rows in my database. They don't want to pay for that, so they send an email. Oh, great, so now I get an email that a person has to read. We tried to get them to send it to a bot account. They didn't want to do that. And then they got to read it, save the file, open the file, load it into the database. So in trying to go to your team and say, it's another $100,000 for the license that we need to automate that, it doesn't always work. But so it's a great question.
Yeah, it's just data integrity, isn't it?
Yeah.
At least if it's sat in a SQL database, you can run all sorts of things, but someone accidentally deletes a row in a spreadsheet.
Yeah, we'll always try and move the source data off Excel eventually, but just...
Yeah.
Within commercial real estate, there's often a large portion of the body of the employees that they just use Excel. So what they do is they export the data out of the systems, and then they do calculus within Excel. And if it's that, then I just direct the Power BI to the database. But if it's that they're just getting Excels from a third party and that's what they get, you'll probably find they've got a large amount of them within the directory, and in which case you can just use like a surface layer tool that can then aggregate all that information together, such as Alteryx, that can then bring that through, create an Alteryx database, which can then be or a TD or whatever. That can be, you can sit Power BI or Tableau on after that. It depends where the use case is really.
Then you got a question here too.
How important do you think it is to keep the tech stack and the vendor landscape as minimalistic as possible? Because for data aggregation, you can have somebody for that. For doing the visualization dashboards, you have somebody for that. The CRMs, you can have somebody for that. And you just layers upon layers. And then kind of a lead-up question to that is, which tech vendor do you see today that covers the most amount of that space as possible, so you don't need other vendors to do little pieces for you here and there?
I'll take a stab at that. We're never going to get to a smaller vendor list, right? It's only ever growing, and I'm guilty of that too, because a lot of times the technology we need to use isn't what we're using, even if it's brand new. So I think most companies have a master list of what's accepted, and we try and comply with that, but you get a waiver to do the other things. But the first part of the question, to me, I want the smallest tech and vendor footprint I can possibly have. And even if I pick, a cloud provider, there's too much on the menu. If you look at Amazon's menu, it's, you've got 3,000 things you could use, and Google, you've got 200 things you could use. Just want one. So I think, and this goes back to the technologists who think, ooh, that's shiny, that's new, I want to use that they need to be reined in. So small a tech stack as possible, but sometimes the best technology is when you're not using it.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add to that is, making sure that you're dealing with these software pieces that have got decent APIs really allow you to then, I suppose, decrease the quantity of different companies you work with, because it allows people who aren't, I suppose, specialists in that tool to directly connect, pull that information and enrich it. So making sure that you're working with decent partners that can offer that. And then if I look back at Nuveen Real Estate, if a fund manager or an asset manager see a new shiny tool, they want to go and do it, that's the conversation I'd have with them about APIs. But at the end of the day, they're going to get it if they want it. And as us as technology people, it's just trying to be open as possible to that, and just advise on the ease of use. You got anything to add on to that?
No, I think I see it a lot in ESB, because again, ESB is such a diverse company. There's so many different business units, and they all have their own dedicated IT team. And again, it's like we were trying to find out how many Tableau users we had, and we figured out there's a load of Tableau users in one business unit. Just they had gotten their own set of licenses. We didn't know about that. So yeah, we're trying to condense it down and reduce the tech stack. Just if there's one particular, we use Microsoft Azure for most things now, and that's kind of where we're going. But that's not to say, I say they're all roughly similar. But we're just, being historically a Microsoft house, it was easier to go to the cloud with Microsoft and bring in all the AI capabilities they have, which is fantastic at the moment.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you very much for that, Tom and Kevin. It's been very insightful, and I hope you've all enjoyed it, and enjoy the rest of your day.